If you're somebody that doesn't like to waste time, Agile is really great because it's going to protect you from investing too much time into something that your users aren't going to adopt. In enablement, a big problem that we have is adoption. I don't believe that adoption is the end-all be-all of our success, not even close. I do believe that adoption is a prerequisite for impact. What we do, what we work on, cannot have an impact or solve a problem if people don't even want to use it because it's not in the right application, or they can't access it on their machine, or it just doesn't work for what we're trying to solve for. And the only way to make sure that our stuff is user-centric and adoptable is to start with them in mind, prototype, test, refine, and keep on going.
Welcome to the Enablement Edge, the go-to resource for enablement and go-to-market pros. We're bringing you the secrets, strategies, and tactics that drive meaningful impact. You'll get valuable insights and expertise from enablement leaders so you can become an effective change agent, turn strategy into reality, and transform your organization for the better. Welcome to another episode of the Enablement Edge. And hello once again to my friend, colleague, and co-host, Amber Milano. Amber, it's always such a pleasure to have you here. And I know you were really enjoying this conversation with Sally Ladrach too, right? Sally is the director of enablement at SavATree, which is like this really big company that is like not only doing residential lawn care and tree care, but all sorts of large property developments, and they're consulting over environmentally sustainable ways to maintain trees. I mean, they've got a whole lot of really cool things going on. It's also kind of nice for us to step outside of our usual technology and software area. Although the funny thing is we got dragged right back into it because we were talking about software development for half the show because we got into Agile enablement. And, the fact that it's a rather new concept for many in the space. It's a fascinating approach to enablement. Something I learned a lot through working with Sally and kind of preparing for this. And I know the same is true for you, Amber. What jumped out at you most from this conversation with Sally?
Yeah, there were so many things I was wishing I had a pen, I could write it down as usual. I think one of the things that really struck me was how taking that Agile approach means that you're constantly going back to your stakeholders, to your audience, and saying, here's what we've done to help you. Basically, also know that the great thing she had, our responsibility is to remove the blockers to them generating revenue for the company. And so by getting the opportunity to go to them every couple weeks and say, okay, this is the latest thing that we've done, and it may not be perfect. It is this, it's designed to be iterated on. But that constant seeking of their input and their feedback, I feel like that would create a really virtuous cycle in terms of how effective enablement can be in developing these tools and these processes, whatever it might be, to serve those folks. Is that constant interaction and improvement seemed really powerful to me. I'm really intrigued by this whole thing.
Absolutely. I found it to be a fascinating conversation. Let's jump right in. Sally, thanks so much for joining us. Really excited to have you here. And before we get into Agile enablement, I got to learn more about your company, SavATree. I mean, this is, I think, am I right here, Amber? This may be the first time, at least the first time this season, that we've had a guest who is not from a SaaS company. We're branching out. See what I did there? And we're going to learn about SavATree. I was just, watching some of the videos from your company on YouTube. I'm really intrigued. Tell us a little bit about the company. Tell us a little bit about your role, and then let's jump in.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Steve and Amber. It's great to be here talking with you today. I work at, like you said, a company called SavATree. We are a tree, shrub, and lawn care company with over 100 locations across the United States and Canada. And I might have the most interesting enablement job in the world. So I actually enable a team of sales arborists. And so, they go out and they're looking at trees and evaluating landscapes and helping homeowners really make all their landscape dreams come true, both for your residential customers and for our B2B audience. So really, really interesting sales cycle, really interesting audience, and just general enablement gig. So I'm the director of sales enablement and training. And really all that means is that I'm there to provide the training, the tools, the resources, the process, whatever it is that my arborists need to meet and exceed their sales goals.
And there's a lot more than lawn care and tree care going on here. I mean, you've got this whole consulting arm where you're working with property management and developers to make sure they're really, doing the right things environmentally and aesthetically. I mean, I think there's a lot more to this business, certainly a lot more than I realized going in. Is that a common reaction as people learn more about your business?
Yeah, I think that especially those that maybe only interact with SavATree in one of those aspects, either as a residential customer or a, B2B property manager of an office park or something along those lines. We have this whole, like you said, this whole consulting sort of segment of our business. And I think one of the things I really enjoy about SavATree is that at the end of the day, I can feel really good about the work that we're doing because ultimately, being environmentally conscientious is at the center of what we do. And we want to have that positive environmental impact. And so, yeah, I think that it's surprising to folks how many different ways we do that, whether it's our policies internally, like our, no idling policy for our trucks, or externally with our customers, how we evaluate and make recommendations for managing their landscapes. So yeah, one of the great things about working here.
I love it. All right, Amber, let's kick it off. Let's get into the enablement talk.
Let's do this. Well, Sally, we typically like to ask our guests how they would define enablement and what they think is the most important or the key to really measuring the success of their enablement efforts. I would love to hear how you measure the success of your enablement of sales arborists. I really just wanted the opportunity to say that. Sales arborists. That's so cool. But tell us more. Tell us more about how you think of enablement. There's a little bit of a mix in the field about that. So I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah. And actually, I think that this isn't just applicable to SavATree or to any companies that I've been with prior, but just in general, the way that I define enablement is honestly kind of stupidly simple almost. It's that we are there to help the sales team sell more, right? Now, the how we enable our sales folks to do that varies widely from org to org, right? It could be operational, where there's some operational kinks that are preventing them from being able to execute on their day-to-day. Maybe it's a skills gap where they don't know enough about a certain product, so they can't actually go sell it. There are so many things that could be affecting someone's ability to generate revenue. And the key thing that a sales enablement, consultant or someone who's in a role, a director, a manager, a specialist, whoever it is, the key thing that I think we have to look at is what are the things that are blocking revenue and what are the things that my sellers need in order to help them achieve their goals. And then from there, we can figure out, okay, how do we go solve for that? I think the mistake that some companies make is they start with, we need training. We need XYZ solution, rather than asking someone with that perspective to come in and look at those true problems and see how we might solve for those.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of exploring what are the blocks to our paths to revenue and how can we eliminate those. Really cool. That's going to tee us up really nicely into this conversation too. That's a perfect segue.
It does. A little behind the scenes peek for our listeners and our viewers. We pivoted on the topic of this episode. We were introduced to Sally, suggested that we talk about a different topic. We got on a call, and as we started to get to know each other, it became really clear that Sally had a passion in a different area. So we made a smart pivot. Sally really lit up when we started talking about Agile enablement. Now, Many of you are probably familiar with Agile and how it differs from Waterfall within a product development context. Bear with me if you're not familiar, because I do need to just quickly lay those foundations so folks aren't lost. Traditionally, software development, product development was done in a waterfall process, right? We started with gathering requirements, we built out substantial plans, we had sequential development, we were not very welcoming of change requests as things went on, and we toiled away for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, whatever the case may be, and we presented the world with our finished product. Agile product development really emerged in the early years of this millennium with the Agile Manifesto in 2001 and everything built out from there, and said, wait a minute, no, we need to be more simple. We need to move quickly. We need to have iterative, constant learning. We need to break this thing down into a lot of smaller pieces. We need much more feedback from our users throughout. And it changed the way product development was done. And now the vast majority of software development teams and many in other industries are working on an agile approach. And then it started to move into marketing in other areas. Instead of having, annual plans and months-long campaigns, what if we had smaller pods of people? Maybe one pod that was focused on increasing customer retention within a particular industry or a particular market segment. Maybe another who is focused on retention and upsell and cross-sell, and these semi-autonomous pods that could make marketing more fast-moving and more impactful. These things are happening and have been happening. I had not heard of anyone talking about Agile within enablement until I met you, Sally, and I'm pretty excited to learn more. So tell us, where's this coming from, and what's behind Agile coming into enablement? Why should enablers be educating themselves about this if they're not already educated? And how do they start thinking about where and when they may want to apply this approach?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been in the enablement game for a little bit over 5 years now. And throughout that time, I've been in the Slack channels. I am very involved in RES and the squad, the different groups that are out there. And you hear these same themes come up in terms of how do we really make sure that we're being effective in our roles? How do we make sure we're working with stakeholders well? How do we get these giant initiatives and projects done? We often end up being the conductor of the orchestra or the professional cat herders. And so, I think that there's all of these different, challenges that I've heard consistently across different enablement functions that I've talked to or work with. And when I started working at ThoughtBot a couple of years ago, their software design and development agency, and there were about, I would say 90% of the company was developers. And so it was a very interesting gig in that I was in the minority, being somebody who is not a developer at the company. And everything that we did, the way that we worked was using that Agile framework, not just our client projects where we were consulting and building things and delivering software, but in how we accomplished work together as a team, right? How we carried out our marketing initiatives, how we carried out our enablement initiatives. And so working in that cadence of, we have a planning meeting on, Monday every 2 weeks. We say, these are the things I'm going to pick up for this sprint. We try to complete things inside of that sprint that are small but complete pieces of maybe some larger initiative. And, I won't go into all of how Agile works, but working in that way really got me thinking, why doesn't every enablement team do this? Why don't we all work this way? Because the problems that it solves, that when a software team is creating solutions for its users, right? It's trying to do one thing. It's trying to address a problem, right? Because you don't use or adopt a solution, a software solution or any other solution, unless you have a problem to solve. And what Agile is really great at doing is putting the user at the center and understanding what those users' needs are so that whatever software you build is going to suit those needs in a way that creates adoption and ultimately creates impact for that user. In enablement, I can't tell you how many times I've seen teams, and maybe even done a little bit of this myself in the past. You work on that 6-month rollout of whatever, you put it out there, ta-da, and then nothing happens. People don't use it. Maybe it wasn't designed with the end user in mind, but then you can't even have that impact, right? If your solution for whatever it is isn't being adopted. So that was kind of the, I guess, genesis of how I started thinking about Agile and enablement. Obviously, I'm not the first person to think that Agile is a great way to work, but the nature of enablement is that we are building solutions, and Agile at its core is about building user-centric solutions that are adoptable and solve problems.
It makes so much sense. And, continuous delivery of small pieces instead of waiting to present the entire thing, much closer partnership between the business people and the developers, or in this case, between the sellers and the enablers, continuous learning, testing, measurement, iteration, improvement. I mean, it's hard to argue with the logic, but I think where some people would probably get really nervous is the practicality. Like, it kind of sounds scary. Like, I mean, if I can't plan out what we're going to do, I mean, does that mean I'm just forever iterating, forever responding? What if every 2 weeks I'm being pulled in different directions? This doesn't sound very effective. So how do we make sure that if we are going into this approach, that we also have a North Star? We know what we're doing and why. How do you balance that tension?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the other great things about Agile is really how you structure and prioritize your work. There's a book called Outcomes Over Output by Joshua Seiden, and he wrote a book about enablement without knowing it. The book is actually written for product teams, and what it talks about is how to prioritize your development time for features or parts of the product that are going to produce outcomes. In other words, behaviors that drive business impact, right? So what that looks like in software is, I might have two things in my backlog. One of them is updating the colors on our checkout page, and one of them is adding Apple Pay to our checkout page. Now, the colors are cool, and it's probably something that we could ship pretty quickly, so we would get a lot of points in the hey, let's get stuff done department. But if we look at what the right thing is to do, adding Apple Pay is going to be something that not only enhances our user experience, but it's also going to drive business impact. We're going to see increased conversions. We're going to see a faster time to convert, all that sort of stuff. So in enablement, one of the things I think that we sometimes do is we get distracted. We get distracted by all the different requests. And the thing that I love about looking at that outcomes over output approach is I can look at the things in my enablement backlog and I can say, okay, which of these is going to drive business impact? Is it going to be this one pager, or is it going to be, enabling folks on this cold calling blitz, whatever it is, right? What are the things that are tied to our revenue levers that are going to have impact on the business? So if it's going to affect my win rate, if it's going to affect my average deal size, if it's going to shorten my deal cycle length, if it's going to increase my number of opportunities, those are the things, those are the outcomes that I should be focusing on. And so it not only helps us to deliver value more quickly, it helps us to deliver the right things more quickly. We don't get distracted by the, some so-called random acts of enablement. So I love using Agile as a barometer for that too. Again, what's going to drive that impact?
Speaking for a friend, I get a little nervous when I think about putting stuff out there that isn't fully baked, that might not be exactly right and perfect. I wonder if you can talk us off the ledge a little bit by maybe sharing some success stories or even your own inner workings that sort of help to prioritize this idea of the outcome and the ultimate experience that you're aiming at not being developed in a silo, and how that could overshadow our need for it to be perfect and just right. Any thoughts on that front?
Yeah, I mean, as a recovering perfectionist myself, this is something that has been really hard for me to overcome. But I think that the thing that helps me get over it the most is when I think about if I take 6 months to build something and I wait until it's perfect and I release it, and then I get the feedback and I did a bunch of stuff wrong along the way, I just wasted 6 months of time. If I spend a week building out a prototype of some small piece of that, or, some small complete piece of that, put it in front of my end users and say, does this meet your need? Does this solve the problem? I get that feedback. I only wasted a week if what I did was terrible. Right?
Right.
So if you're somebody that doesn't like to waste time, Agile is really great because it's going to protect you from investing too much time into something that your users aren't going to adopt. Because in enablement, a big problem that we have is adoption. I don't believe that adoption is the end all be all of our success. Not even close. I do believe that adoption is a prerequisite for impact. What we do, what we work on, cannot have an impact or solve a problem if people don't even want to use it because it's not in the right application, or they can't access it on their machine, or it just doesn't work for what we're trying to solve for. And the only way to make sure that our stuff is user-centric and adoptable is to start with them in mind, prototype, test, refine, and keep on going.
Sally, I love hearing about this Agile approach and how you're really involving the field in the solutions that you're bringing to them. I wonder, have you noticed that that has improved your relationship or even increased the adoption that you do get from them because you're essentially involving them in the process and the development of what you're delivering to them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you what, when I forget to do that, I very much regret it because I'm not perfect and I don't do it every time. But in this role and in other roles, when I have been really heavily involving folks from the field in what I'm creating, when I've put stuff in front of them early and said, does this make sense? Is this helpful? Does this solve your problem? That's when I've hit the home runs. That's when I've put something out and seen it, used across the board. So, I think one of the examples of something that often people get hung up on in sales enablement, but that really is something that you could agile very quickly, is the concept of a enablement communication, right? So in a lot of organizations, there's communications or asks coming at the sales team from every angle. And so one of the things that we can do as an enablement is to consolidate those, put it together in one place where sellers can look at it and know, if I pay attention to this thing, I will be paying attention to the right things, right? There's an action item for me, it's going to be in here. And I've seen some people sit there and they take a month to choose what tool they're going to use, like a MailChimp or Constant Contact, or do we use an internal something or whatever it is. And just choosing a tool to use can really get people hung up. But if we're just doing Agile, right? What if we just manually asked all the different directors of whoever, hey, what are your things you need the sales team to know this week? We patch it together inside of, even a SharePoint news post, right? Which you can format to look really pretty, by the way, and send it out to the team and see how they react. Did they like it? Did they respond and say wow, this is really great? Did everybody completely ignore it? You can ask a couple of your folks from the field, what did you think about this? And we didn't spend 6 months choosing a tool, perfecting the process of how we would get those updates from our, different cross-functional stakeholders, creating all the documentation around how this perfectly groomed thing is going to work. We just went ahead and did it once, didn't spend that much time on it, and we can get back that very valuable feedback. So the next one we do, okay, now we've proved out that this is actually helpful. Now let's go figure out what kind of tool we're going to need. Oh, and because we found out information from our users, we also are better informed now as to what path we should take with choosing our own tools to actually go implement this thing.
Conceptually, we've been all over this, but nobody has actually said the words yet, minimum viable product. And that's what you're talking about, right, Sally? And I want to go back to something you said a few minutes ago that some listeners may have missed, the very small correction you made to yourself. You said, make a small piece of it. And then you stopped and said, make a small complete piece. And that's actually an important little correction you made, because a minimum viable product isn't just like the wheel of a bus. You know, a minimum viable product might be a skateboard that becomes a bicycle, becomes a motorcycle, becomes a car, then becomes a bus that we can all ride on. You don't just take a wheel, or you don't just make a row of seats, because that's not complete and it doesn't work. So I want to pull on that thread. When you said create something small and get it out there, but it has to be complete. That sounds like a contradiction, but it isn't. Could you maybe give us an example? You just actually did give us one example there about that communication piece, but maybe another example of how you could create something small but complete.
So one place where I've been able to deliver something complete and then iterate was in one of my prior roles. We had to create proposals, like I think a lot of companies do. And we had our proposals inside of this tool that quite honestly was really hard to use. It wasn't providing a lot of value. People couldn't find the pieces of content that they needed very easily to put those proposals together. And so, let's stop. let's do something else. What are the user needs? So created user stories around, okay, I need to be able to quickly create a proposal and still customize it for my customers. Okay, great. I also need to be able to easily find the content that I need, whether it's the specific case studies or it's the product specific material that I need to put into that proposal, right? So those are two sort of user needs that we started with. I said, okay, we're going to just take all this stuff out of here. We're going to create a proposal template in Google Slides. And we're going to take these blocks that we have, and we're going to start with the ones that are most essential, right? It's like title slide, about us, maybe some product slides, a few of our best case studies. Boom. Your first template is now done. You're able to put that in front of people and say, okay, what's missing? Well, actually, we need case studies on XYZ. Oh, we actually are selling more of this service line now, so we really need that slide in here too. Okay, great. Now I can iterate and put those things in. What I avoided was just automatically taking every single thing that was in that other tool and taking 3 months to migrate it over to the new template, which is what a lot of people would have done. What I probably would have done in a past life, So that was sort of iteration number one. And we said, okay, we've got like our most important slides in here. And we still had this customer need, this user story around, I need to be able to do this quickly, but still in a customizable way. And so rather than going to, one of the other solutions I might have gone to in the past using a different tool or, saying, well, that's tough. You just delete the ones you don't need, whatever. I kind of sat there and thought about it. I was like, I wonder if we can automate this. What I ended up doing was creating a Google form that people could fill in the client's name, their name, the products that they were going to be talking about, and then the industry. And what it did when they hit submit was it would actually, in the background with that Google app script, create a new Google Slides deck that had the customized client name in all the places where we had that placeholder. It would include the relevant case studies. It could include if, the rep's name was in there, wherever their name should appear, right? So we started off with this one thing of like, we need this out of this tool that's a pain. Okay, now it's in Google Slides. People can actually use it. Okay, now it's the next iteration. Okay, we're going to add the things that we were missing before. Great. Okay, now how do we really get this thing cooking? And so each step, it was still complete and functional, but we were able to make it better every single time.
Are enablement charters compatible with Agile? We've spent a lot of time on this show talking about the importance of charters. A lot of others in the space talk about the importance of charters. One might think that that's completely incompatible, that a charter is inherently waterfall. Can we still have the benefits of a charter and deliver in an Agile way, or is this really two separate worlds?
I mean, first of all, I'm probably the worst person to ask about charters because I've honestly never been much of a fan, particularly because I feel as though what you do and what you say yes and no to is far more powerful than anything you could put on a piece of paper. However, that being said, I'm not saying that charters are stupid and don't belong anywhere. I think they do have their use case. But I do think that if you are working in an agile way, a charter might actually be a really useful tool to be able to illustrate to your cross-functional stakeholders, this is how we work as a team. This is how we prioritize. This is how we take in requests and then put them into our backlog. And to really set those rules of engagement, because it's such a different way of working, especially for folks who are not in the product world, you might have to spell things out a little bit for them, right? When you're like, well, for the next 2 weeks, I'm actually only working on XYZ. Would you like to come to our planning meeting and take the first 5 minutes 2 weeks from now to discuss how we might, handle this request, because it's a good one and it's important, but we're working on this right now. That's a weird thing for a lot of organizations, I think.
It does seem like there could be a good balance there, that the charter is the longer term objectives. It's almost the North Star for where we're heading, but the sprints are all the steps we're taking to get there.
Yeah. And I think a charter really is like your rules of engagement, right? If anything, I think that the charter should not outline what you are going to do, because the what is going to change from week to week, from month to month, from, second to second in some industries. But I think that what it is really good for, again, is establishing your rules of engagement, your ways of working, so that cross-functional stakeholders know what to expect from you as an enablement team. And you can make it very clear, I'm happy to help you solve this problem. Here's what I'm going to need from you. I need to be able to actually deep dive on what the problem is and then quantify it before it goes into the backlog. I need XYZ stakeholder at this cross-functional sprint on this initiative every 2 weeks, whatever it is, right? You can outline that in a charter really well. I would avoid sort of putting in the what we are doing.
I was thinking it would be a great opportunity to share your original point about the outcomes and how we're going to prioritize based on how we're going to drive the business forward versus I need a one-pager yesterday, or the popcorn or the fire department request.
Yeah.
How
exactly.
are we really looking at this strategically? That'd be a great place to explain that and share that approach in the charter. I like that.
Okay, Sally, I think a lot of people are going to be convinced that this is an area they need to learn more about. Perhaps they ought to do some experimentation in. Can you make it really easy for us? What are some of the real key steps involved in approaching enablement through Agile?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step really is that when you get a request or someone brings you a solution, start with the problem. Do that customer discovery to understand what the root cause is, and then quantify it. How is this impacting revenue, and how many people is this impacting? From there, that allows you to prioritize. Then we're going to go create a solution, right? You might use design thinking or some other device to try to brainstorm how you're actually going to go solve it. Before we actually go build stuff, we're going to prototype it and put it in front of somebody, get some feedback, right? Maybe build the smallest iteration of that thing, right? Then we're going to launch it. Okay, after we launch it, let's do a retro and figure out what could be done better and what we need to do next time, right? So, and then from there, you identify the next problem and you solve it, and it just goes around in a circle. But that's a very basic, high level. If I wanted to start being more agile about my practice, here's how I do that.
So to close out our podcast, we love to do this sort of rapid fire question and answer piece. And I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball and tell us, what do you foresee will be the biggest change that we're going to experience in the enablement field over the next 18 to 24 months?
I think that one of the things that we are going to continue to see change is the demand for enablement to be data-centric, data-driven. I think a lot of enablers right now have a big gap around their data skills when it comes to understanding how it's structured, the analysis, right? I think we've already seen that the less you're able to tie your impact to revenue, the less job security you have. And so I think that companies are also starting to hire and look for folks in enablement who are data minded. I was searching for jobs a few months back, went through about 70 interviews. And a trend I was seeing across all those job descriptions, hundreds of job descriptions that I read, was data driven, understands data, analyzes data to identify gaps. And that's something I think we as an enablement field could use a little bit of upskilling in. So that's going to become more important. I'm pretty positive about that.
Nice. I like that. On the other hand, what do you think won't change in the next 18 to 24 months?
I think that the way that people have always bought and the way that people who love to sell are is probably not going to change that much. It's funny, I've been getting really into Sandler lately as a sales methodology, and I listened to his conglomeration of recordings from the 60s and 70s, and the way people bought hasn't really changed. What works in sales really hasn't changed that much. It's really shocking to me. I think we overcomplicate a lot of it. I think that has not changed. And I think that sellers haven't really changed either. They like to be involved. They like to adopt things that are useful, and they don't adopt things that aren't. I think that's why enablement is sometimes called on to be the police, to make sellers do something. But at the end of the day, I think that's one of the reasons why Agile is so great and why it's been working really well for over a couple of decades now, is because people and why they use solutions really doesn't change.
Yeah, interesting. All right, last question. What would you tell us is the best advice you've received? This doesn't have to be career or enablement advice. Just what is the best piece of advice you've seen or you've heard in your life?
Yeah, I think it's have a bias for action. I think that that's been one of the things that for me, again, as a recovering perfectionist, has been really difficult at times, is to just do the freaking thing and stop thinking about it. But what I have seen is that those who are, not reckless action, but those who take action more than they just think about doing stuff are the ones who succeed, whether it's in life, in business, and whatever. Just taking that next right step and not letting anything stop you from doing that. Just start it.
Love it.
That is a fantastic place to end, Sally. A wonderful answer and a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I really loved that. I hope everyone else did as well. And I hope that many of you are inspired to learn more about Agile and maybe start tinkering around in some areas that you weren't exploring before. Sally, thanks for joining us on the Enablement Edge.
Thanks so much, Sally.
Thanks, Amber and Steve.
Thanks for joining us on the Enablement Edge. We're on YouTube and all your favorite podcast providers. See you next time.
The Enablement Edge is brought to you by the team at Seismic. Seismic is the global leader in enablement, keeping organizations on the cutting edge of engaging customers, enabling teams, and igniting revenue growth. You can learn more at seismic.com.